G'day Internet, welcome back to another video. Now, game consoles from the early to mid 80s. There certainly are some classic, iconic, if you will, machines that fall into that category. For instance, it could be the Atari 2600 or VCS, depending on what era you're talking about. Obviously, what falls into that category would be the Nintendo Entertainment System, no arguments about that whatsoever. Or, if you're like me, possibly the Sega Master System. But one machine that I would like to nominate for possibly the most unusual, certainly the most unique, is this guy. This is the Vectrex. With its built-in CRT and vector-based graphics and utilising cool little overlays, it's certainly a machine unlike any other. And I even like the way it tucks away its little joystick. Very cool. Now, the Vectrex is certainly a machine that falls into the category of machines that I thought I would never own. But this particular one recently popped up at a local collectible store. I won't say how much I paid for it, but it was less than eBay prices, put it that way. And it was just there. And I couldn't walk out without it. Now, at first glance, it looks clean and respectable. The shop owner obviously gave it a wipe down on what feels like some Armor All or something like that. But there are a few telltale signs that things may not be as clean as we think. If we take a closer look at the controller, you may be able to see some ground-in dirt that the quick wipe over managed to miss. Same with some of the nooks and crannies underneath near the speaker grill and kind of down in here. And also down in the rear vents where not much has been done. Now, don't get me wrong, I could be completely overreacting on this. I could open it up and there's just the usual amount of dust and that's about it. Or it could be a complete horror show. But I prefer to find out myself. So we're just going to put the controller aside for a minute. Let me lay down something soft and lay this thing down on its face. Now, I've never pulled one of these apart, but I see a screw there, screw, and two more up in here. So let's start with that. Well, I can pretty confidently say that those screws have probably never been out of this machine. So, I think that's everything. Yep, okay. Well, we're still hung up. Where? We hung up on a screw. Oh, there we go. And we're in. Well, it's not quite as bad as I thought it might have been, but it certainly ain't pretty. So that is the very dusty insides of my Vectrex. Yeah. I think the only job to do here is a complete disassemble. I'll hit everything I possibly can with the air compressor, because I think that's just the best start at this point, and we'll see where we're at after that. So taking a closer look at this, it seems that, well, at least a fair chunk of it is actually hardwired. At least the yoke is hardwired to what, well, I'm going to call the AC analog power board something. It's definitely hardwired to that. There's bits of this board hardwired to this board, I think. Where does that go? Oh, maybe not. So I think I'm going to start by, where do I want to start? I'm going to disconnect this, and slide the yoke off, I think. All right, that's the power board loose at least. Let's try and now get this free. And there is our incredibly dirty Vectrex. Now I'm going to try and actually not strip it down any more than it currently is. I'm hoping it's at a point where I can get to enough stuff to clean it. Although if I can remove the main circuit board, I might. Well, it's a part more, which means I can get to more of it. Well, it's certainly not yet perfect, but I think we can all agree that it's significantly less bad. So the cleanup from here, I think, is simply just going to be IPA and cotton buds. It's a bit of a pain because so much of it is hardwired together, and I really don't want to start desoldering a whole bunch of stuff and then, well, let's be honest, inevitably forgetting how it all goes back together. So I'll start on the main circuit board. The power board is actually reasonably unscathed. It's not too bad at all. And this frame over here all needs a thorough clean. This will probably get hit with some Windex, more cotton buds. Okay, that's as good as it's going to get. I've removed the tube from the plastic, and this and the back half are now going to go and have a bath. So next up, let's turn our attention to the controller. I don't know what to expect inside this, given the inside of the actual Vectrex, although this is primarily sealed, so I'm hoping it's nowhere near as bad. The reason I wanted to leave this till second is that the screws on this are actually underneath the label. And because this is a 40-something-year-old label, as soon as you try and lift it, it just cracks and permanently bends and all the rest of it. So it's kind of a one-off thing. Now, luckily, there is a seller on eBay who sells reproductions. So I've been smart enough for once and actually ordered a replacement ahead of time. So I'm hoping I can lift this up as much as possible to at least get to the screws. It's putting up a bit of a fight. Right. Now, do I try and just remove the whole thing, which would save me trying to find another edge? Oh, there's more screws. Ugh. It's a bit sad having to do this, but there's not much I can do about it, because there's just no real saving that. Right, screws. And in theory, that should be it. It is. All right, there's the bottom. Well, it's actually not too bad inside, to be honest. So the PCB and the joystick is now out. It seems to use our classic kind of rubber dome membrane on a PCB, which is looking pretty grubby. Now, I did have some issues with the buttons working, so we are going to have to do something about those carbon pads and the PCB. Might as well throw some contact cleaner into the potentiometers and... Whoa! I didn't think that through too well. And give all this a clean. This I'm going to have to remove all the glue residue off. Now, with these carbon pads, if you remember recently I did the entire keyboard on the PET and I used that fancy carbon contact paint. Well, that little tub only has a shelf life of about 3 days once it's mixed, so it's, well, it's in the bin. And I don't have anything handy to be able to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the old paper trick. And I can literally use the envelope that the sticker came in. And this is just a case of giving it a slight, each one, a slow wipe across some paper. And the paper acts as an incredibly fine abrasive and gets the surface of the carbon pad back to a better shape. The other thing I'll do with this is I'll actually put it in the opposite way from where it went in. So what that should mean is the little traces on the PCB will be in a different position, and that should hopefully help as well. Well, that's a lot cleaner. What I will do though is I won't put the new sticker on until I've been able to test the buttons. If they're still playing up, then I'll go and order some proper contact remote control rubber contact stuff, and I'll redo this. So the controller's now done. Obviously I've left the sticker off. I will say that removing the rest of that residue was not fun, but I think we're at the point where we can actually start putting things back together. So I will start with the bottom case and the CRT. This just drops in here, and assuming I can find all the correct screws, I believe these little guys went at the bottom if I remember correctly. Now I'll leave this one off because it's actually attached to the analog board. Now for the tricky part, which is kind of dropping the main board and the analog board, well, in at the same time. So this, no, other way around. This goes in somewhat like so. Oh, that speaker cable needs to be run through. Okay. Balance. Speaker cable comes through that hole. Let's drop you in first. All right, that felt solid. And I believe that slots in there. Yeah, that looks right. Come on. Careful with the yoke. Come on, drop in. No, you went to one side. All right. Start by getting at least a couple of screws in. That doesn't feel right. Never force a screw. I think that's actually part of the outside chassis. Screws in there. It's at this point in time I really wish I'd taken better, well, track of what screw went where. We've got 3 really long ones and 1 short one. Okay. Anode cap back on. Now, in my idiocy, I had actually marked the, put a mark on the CRT in regards to the rotation of the yoke, and then promptly decided to give the CRT a wipe over. You imagine what happened, but I've got a pretty reasonable idea of where it was, and it was basically straight up and down, but we're not going to put the back on it straight away, so I can always adjust it. I'm going to replace this zip tie if I have one, but I'm not going to do it up straight away because, as we all know, as soon as I do, there'll be something wrong. Righto, moment of truth. But before we do, something that was missing on this machine is the power/volume knob. So I 3D printed one. I found a design on Thingiverse, which I'll link in the description, but I did adapt it slightly because I wasn't really happy of the way it fitted on the D shaft, but it looks quite good in there. And we have hum. We have Vectrex. Nice. In all its crystal sharp glory. It's always nice when you know, don't kill something when you're cleaning it. So the next question is, how did I go with the joystick? Because I'm not actually sure what button does what. I should read the manual. Thrust works, transport works, fire works. I don't know what the first button does in this. Okay, button 1 does nothing. Okay, but to do it properly, really should put the little front overlay in. Ah, that's better. It's actually really blurry now. I think this is a bit dirty and a bit old. But my Vectrex is, well, it was working before, but it now works better and doesn't have 10 tons of dust inside. And there we go, there is my Vectrex, all still working, including the joystick, and no longer a fire hazard inside, which is, well, it's not a bad thing, let's be honest. So what's next for the mighty Vectrex? Well, I think I'll get one of those debuzz kits. I don't know if you can hear it over the microphone, but now as far as I understand, the buzzing, it's not anything terminal, as in that it's not going to kill the machine. It's more of a case of it's just annoying, but I think I'll get one anyway. Next, I need some games. I don't have any other than the built-in Mindstorm, which is actually a pretty good game. It's essentially an Asteroids knockoff, but I quite like it. Which leads me down either one or two paths. There are some multi-carts that you can get because the library isn't very big. Everything just fits on an EEPROM and off you go. Alternatively, there is something called a Pytrex, which, as the name implies, is a Raspberry Pi Zero on a cartridge into the side of the machine. Now, I'm kind of in two minds about that. And the reason is this, is from my understanding, the Pytrex basically, well, the Raspberry Pi basically takes over the entire machine. You're essentially left with a monitor and a joystick, and the Raspberry Pi does everything else. And I'm not sure if that's really what I'm after. I'd be interested in your opinions down in the comments for sure. But I am also aware that it can then give you a lot more abilities on the Vectrex. I believe there is like a Battlezone clone which will run on it, things like that. So maybe that's the trade, or a good trade-off at least, for the Raspberry Pi kind of taking over the machine. But once I do get some games, there is then the problem of overlays. Every time you bought a game back in the day, you got the overlay with it. Now, those overlays are now, well, rare as rocking horse shit, and all falling to pieces, and most of them are really kind of muddy and worn, a bit like this Mindstorm one is. But I had a look around, and there has been a few people. There's a mob online out of America that will sell you a whole kit, a whole set of them. It's about 220 odd US dollars. So by the time I throw in exchange rate and shipping, all the rest of it, that's kind of nearly half of what I paid for the entire machine, but it would be nice to have. But I have seen some DIY videos online, and I've taken some inspiration from those and started working on my own DIY overlays as well. Actually, I've got a prototype. Hang on. Here is a prototype that I made. This one's obviously for Berserk. It's been kicking around for a while and it didn't turn out that great. That's why it's a bit grubby still. But it does fit in here, if I remember correctly. It was a few weeks ago that I last played with this. This particular one, I think I went back and I boosted up some of the colours. But it does fit, and it does kind of at least look the part, so that's kind of cool. So future videos on the Vectrex will be either the multicart or the Pytrex, depending on which way I decide to go, and I might even do a video on how I made these. But for now, that will pretty much do it. If you liked the video, click like, subscribe, all the usual YouTubey stuff. As always, a massive shout out to my Patreons who are scrolling up the screen as I speak. And if you'd like to help support the channel, there is a link in the description. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.